All right, let's see. Lectern. Just want to check some sound here. Okay, that's a little better. There we go. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, we have a couple of things to cover today. We're going to touch on some things Corona, a little bit on schools, and then of course our deep dive topic for today. Let me just check. Is that got a little echo reverb? Matt, is that you? Give us 1 second here. Okay, great. All right, so and then our deep dive topic is we're going to be an update on a long-standing challenge in our city that we're making some progress on with long-standing dilapidated buildings and so forth. And so we're on a site of one of these sort of seminal problem buildings that had been a crime issue for years. And we'll talk about what that entails. I want to let folks know we're roughly at the corner of Palomas and Alvarado. There's a pedestrian bridge right here, so even though this is kind of a quiet little neighborhood, there's actually a lot of foot traffic because of the pedestrian bridge here. And also a reason why we had to take care of this property. So let's begin with some JIC updates. That's our Joint Information Center. First, of course, the state is no longer prioritizing COVID testing for asymptomatic individuals. So you should seek a test if you have symptoms or if you're in close contact with a household member or someone you work with who has tested positive. That's where we really want to focus people's efforts right now. Now, there's also some questions we're getting about the self-quarantine for travel and the exemptions for that. And so a couple of things to note. Again, these are the state orders. Mandatory self-quarantine does not apply to New Mexico residents who've left the state to obtain medical care or those who've left for less than 24 hours for matters pursuant to parenting responsibilities. And that's pretty much straight out of the health order. So also the the New Mexico Aging and Long-Term Services Department has announced a new nursing home visitation guidelines. This is another issue we're getting a lot of calls about. So please check with that. And basically you need to schedule it in Bernalillo County, and you can contact that department for more details there. Now, also questions on the federal sick leave program and in terms of your rights there. I'm going to hold up a flyer. This is available at most of our community centers and also available online on our websites, but this basically speaks to the fact that federal law may allow for paid sick leave for families to leave to take care of their family during this time, and that's of employers with under 500 employees who have been asked to quarantine by government officials or healthcare providers, are experiencing COVID symptoms, or caring for someone with symptoms, or caring for children because school is closed. So again, the federal law may allow you to take leave because of taking care of your kids. And so, of course, if school is closed. Now, this is also a good opportunity. Well, let me share a few other data points on this. If you do meet these requirements, and you are sick or have to quarantine, these can pay up to $5,110. And also, if you're caring for someone else or can't afford childcare, it's basically 2/3 of the regular rate, up to $10,000. And employees are covered. Wages are reimbursed through tax credits. And the tax credits also apply to amounts paid to maintain health insurance coverage. So there's a lot of details around this. That's why you should really basically call with different questions, and all of that is available. The New Mexico Center for Law and Poverty, you can reach out to them to really get the full rundown on the different options. So along with the public health order enforcement efforts, the city is engaged in outreaching to businesses on these requirements. So you can also give 311 a call and they'll help direct you where to go. But we have done 113 interactions on enforcement of this aspect of the public health order in the last 7 days. So as you can imagine, between school and the unemployment benefits either changing or not changing federally, this is something a lot of Burqueños are asking about, and so we want to make sure people know what's available for them. Okay, also with respect to school, I think the city has received a lot of input. We announced what we're trying to do with our kids programs, and we are in touch with the APS, and we're trying to work with them on how we can best do that. I will mention from the city's perspective, again, not teachers' perspective, not APS's perspective, from the city program's perspective, it is much easier for us to have online learning somewhat asynchronous. And most folks know what this means if you're a parent, but it basically means that we need a half a day available to have a parent be able to put kids in our programs. We can't do that if there's chunks of online learning all day. And so again, if you're a single parent who has to work, this is the challenge. We want to do everything we can to not have that parent choose between having to work or having to take care of their kids while they're doing online learning. So we've learned a couple of things. Number one, we need that in-person online learning to be grouped, either one full day and off a full day, or in the morning or in the afternoon, so that the city can provide alternative care at other times so that parent can go to work. The other aspect of this is there's a very strong correlation with age of child. So the older the child is, it seems to be the more effective online learning is, and the less parental involvement that is required, right? So obviously, if the child can be home alone, like high schoolers, and they can do online learning by themselves, they know how to use a computer, that all seems to work out. But as you go younger, that problem gets much worse. When we're talking about first graders trying to learn online all day, they can't be alone. And they also need assistance, even with basic things like the computer, which is making it hard for parents to be able to work. So we do think that there should probably be a look at different flavors of different hybrid models that are associated with the age of the child. And so that's sort of the latest. And again, we're sticking with our hat. This is what we know and what we've learned with respect to how our city can help these parents with childcare. We're not speaking to curriculum or anything like that. So those are really two key learnings that we've had. So we'll continue to work with our APS partners to flesh this out. But we do know that if there's a situation where we're doing online learning for many months, and for young children who can't be alone and need supervision, that is putting parents in an impossible choice if they're essential workers or they have to work. That's what we've got to avoid. That's what we're trying to work with APS to avoid. Okay, now let's talk about our deep dive topic for today, which is nuisance properties. As a reminder, our administration is recommitted to trying to keeping our neighborhoods safe, and it's really as simple in many cases as removing nuisance properties that have long been havens for crime and criminal activity. Right now, the properties that we are taking care of, there are 5 that we've taken care of in the last month. One of them is commercial, 4 are residential. And in total, these were responsible for 321 calls to APD. They were also responsible for the fire department for 20 different responses from our fire department. And so each property goes through a lengthy process that gives due process to the owner and lots of time to support bringing these properties up to compliance. And each demolition is voted on by City Council, so there's also a public opportunity for people to weigh in. And we know that neighborhoods, really, their safety has to come first, and it's a top priority for us, and we're trying to address both of those at the same time. And to put it in perspective, just doing 5 properties this summer is 5 times more than we did for like the past 5 years before this administration came to office. So it might not sound like a lot, but this is a huge increase from what we used to do before. And as a reminder, again, property owners are given many months, most of the time years, to clean up these efforts, and we try and make sure there's a strong association with just sheer neglect. And we hope that the property owners will now donate the property to the city so that we can do something like a Xeriscape or a pocket park or something for the community. But again, these are still private properties, so we're not able to do that at this time. Now, last thing I would really mention is that there are other properties in the pipeline. So we now have a whole process that we go through, and actively through a series of multiple warnings, multiple opportunities, even a city council hearing before this takes place. But we go through that process. We don't wait anymore. We go through that process, and if you still can't clean up your act by the end of that process, we will tear your property down. So, with more on that process, the director of our planning department, Brendan Williams. Brendan? And then we'll have our neighborhood rep at the end.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brendan Williams. I serve as the city's planning director, and the planning department provides a variety of services to the community, but one of those services is in the form of our code enforcement division, and they are responsible for working on and working with property owners to bring problem properties into compliance. That is the ultimate goal of the division, is compliance. What you see behind me is almost a worst case scenario. As the mayor mentioned, when we have a problem property that's brought to our attention, code enforcement does everything in its power to notify the property owner, to address the situation, to inform the owner of what methods they need to undertake in order to bring the property into compliance. And only when we have a property owner that can't or won't step forward and do what needs to be done to bring the property up to just minimum standards, does the city engage in the process by which we knock somebody's house down. It's a long process. We'll have some neighbors that come up and talk in a little bit. They can tell you the details about that. But from the city's perspective, that's a long process on purpose. We are knocking down somebody's house, and we want to be very intentional and very methodical before we have to do that. Again, that is not our first option. That is not our preference or not our choice. But we also recognize that properties like this one become a drain on city resources. They require tax dollars to address the problems that are created. This particular property was worked on by our code enforcement division for over 2.5 years, and during that time, multiple efforts were made to contact the owner and any other responsible party to step forward and do what needed to be done. And that included securing the house because it was vacant, so to keep trespassers out and to prevent it from becoming an attractive nuisance, as well as dealing with the yard, with the litter, the debris, the weeds, that sort of thing that often crop up on a unmaintained vacant piece of property. Additionally, once we got involved in the enforcement process, we learned that the corner right behind you here was a school bus stop. And so the connection with children having to wait for the bus in the morning or getting off the bus in the afternoon, and having a problem property behind us where there were often vagrants and trespassers on the property became a significant consideration for the city. Over the course of those 2.5 years, just in boarding and cleaning alone, the city spent $10,000 to maintain the property. And code enforcement, using a strategic plan that is consistent with the goals of the current administration, using data analysis that was collected, determined that this property had reached its end in that the final straw was that no owner was stepping forward, and it was determined that it was easier for the city and cheaper for the city to engage in the demolition process than continue to maintain that property without a responsive owner. As the mayor mentioned, over the last 4 months, Code Enforcement Division has been responsible for identifying and shepherding through 5 different properties for demolition, again, because the owner would not step forward and do what they needed to do. And I can report that there are 4 other properties that are now in that city council pipeline, 2 of which were approved for condemnation by city council at last week's council meeting. And just last night, one of the council subcommittees approved 2 additional properties. Again, those will go forward to the full council for consideration, but because of the nature of those, the problems with those properties, they're also coming forward for condemnation. Again, the hope is that we'll have somebody step forward as we engage, as we go through that process to do what needs to be done. But certainly if we have to, we recognize that we have a responsibility to the community, and we'll demolish a property if we have to do so, provided that there are no other options. I think that'll cover it for me. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. And here's a picture of what this used to look like right here as a reminder. And also want to just emphasize this bridge behind the cameras that you can't see, one of the bridges across the freeway. I was trying to remember, it's Freedom High School. It's on the other side, New Futures. And so again, this area actually is in close proximity to children and so forth. And so to hear more about the history of this property, to talk more a little bit about that, want to announce our neighbor across the street, Kenneth Pedigo. Ken, come on up.
I'd like to thank the mayor and the dignitaries for showing up and basically telling you what we've been through the last few years. My wife and I are both retired, and having to live and put up with this for these years, it's been unbearable, to be truthful. We've tried to keep the people that are knowledgeable involved by making phone calls, for them having to follow the various steps that need to be done to remedy the situation. Nobody wants to see anybody's home taken away. But after a certain amount of time, when that home takes the property value of your home down, then something needs to be taken care of. There's been times that when we were sitting out on the front porch, APS school system was parked out in front of my house. And being a nosy neighbor, I went out and asked what the situation was. And they informed me that the needles and trash and stuff like this, that where the bus used to stop, was unbearable for the kids. And so I said, well, park in front of my house. No trouble. You're there for 5 minutes at the most. This way, everybody gets to see where the kids get off. The kids get right back on and go right to school. Vagrants coming in and out. Been numerous phone calls to the police department and everything else like that. I do appreciate the city for what they've done. They've responded to me and my wife in courteous manners, and they kept us updated as to what procedures were being taken. And we understand that there's a certain number of things that has to do before something like this can be taken care of. The house here, if you look at it, was not a home. But if you look at this vacant spot to me is better looking than what we had to put up with. Granted, I'm sure that there's going to be somebody that's going to want to come in here and build a property on this home. That gives us one more neighbor. Hopefully they have kids. When you get kids in the neighborhood, that eliminates a lot of problems. When kids are in the neighborhood running around, homeless people don't hang around. And so this is what we're looking forward to. The more kids we can get back into this neighborhood, the better off it's going to be. And again, I stutter a lot. I apologize for that. But I do, again, want to appreciate the mayor for what he has done, the city councilors for what they have done, and especially one particular gentleman, Chris Romero. This gentleman has dealt personally with me on several of these occasions, and I know that he's probably got tired of listening to me, but he's never said no. And so I do want to appreciate what the city and has done. And if you will take a look at this before you leave, you'll say, hey, that's not bad compared to the pictures that we've showed you. So you folks all have a good day. Be safe out there and take care, okay?
All right, and that's a good way to wrap up, especially I want to thank our planning team and Chris, and also Angelo, who's many folks know has been doing this for a long time, but now is in a more senior role, and we're excited to have him in that role. So appreciate the department's work on this. Okay, with that, we'll take questions from folks if there are some.
No questions on the chat, so
Yeah. You said it's intentionally a long process, and some neighbors can maybe feel frustrated with that. Do you think it should take months or years? And we know this is progress from what we've seen from years and years and years of nothing happening, but how long should it take when there's an identified problem property to get to today?
You know, the question is about, how long should it take? And this one was about 2.5 years. And we want to have a balance between adequate time for remedy, because compliance is always better than demolishing. So I would say this, each property is unique. There's no special time. In my head, it's 18 months. But sometimes I think we should move faster. Sometimes, especially if they are trying to keep it up, we give them more time. So it's really a huge variety when it comes to that.
When it's our job to help identify problems in Albuquerque. Today we're talking about reaching a solution. How does it feel to have the solution and see that the city government is doing its job and making, he said it was unbearable to live here. Now that we've reached this place, how does it feel to see the city government follow through and get to where we are today?
Question about how it feels to see some follow through and things actually happen. And, I would say in many ways it's very, this is part of the reason why, you ask for this job, is to actually make a difference in people's lives and help. And I think for us, what we've seen is hopefully it also demonstrates that the city will take action and that we have an effective city government at some level. We know we have a lot of challenges and things can take a long time. But this is an area where we've made marked improvements. And so I think it also shows fundamentally when you call 242 cops, when you call 311, we log those calls now and we track them and we score every property. And when they reach a certain score, we move faster. So I think this does honor that sort of proportional response, right? If a property has a challenge for a month and then it goes away, then, we're not going to go demolish it. But if it's a reoccurring problem like this one was, now we will take action. And so I think that's the way government should work.
My last one for you is that there are some properties that are still a problem. You mentioned there's a number in the pipeline. One that we highlighted last night was the Rising Phoenix Apartments. Part of that area is really in tough shape. Can you say where we are in accelerating the process there and what the city is doing about the problem in the Rising Phoenix Apartments?
So again, there are many, the question is about, what we're doing about the other properties in the pipeline, and a good example given about the Rising Phoenix. These properties, we will continue to be vigilant on these. And as we mentioned, we try and batch these in sort of groups of 5. We've got another group of 5 coming up. The apartment buildings are especially challenging because we'll never do this unless it's vacant, right? Obviously. And because the apartments have multiple people in them, as long as there's one person still in that apartment, there's only so much we can do with fines and regulations and so forth. So those ones have a much longer clock, unfortunately. But historically, we actually weren't even really going after those. And as of a couple of years ago, we are now doing that. And I'm hoping that some of these apartments too we can use, as a good example for others. And so the Rising Phoenix is high on the list, but those apartments have been a challenge for a long time, and there's a lot of people living in them. And so, obviously their shelter is the most important thing. So the way the demolition, the question is about what do we do after the demolition. And the way this process works in general is, remember, these are still properties owned by private individuals. So the city doesn't own the property. What we do is there's now a lien on the property that says if they sell it, the price of the demolition has to be paid back to the city. So that's why, again, we'd love to make this a park or something of that nature, but unless the owner actually donates it to us, we're unable to do that. So what we do is we basically make them pay it back upon transaction. Is that right? All right. Do you want to add anything? And to add a little more of the technicalities, Brennan can chime in.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on that, and the city continues to engage in collection efforts. This property, for example, as I mentioned earlier, had about $10,000 in liens for boarding and cleaning prior to demo. The owner of the property has paid for those for those liens. There now are resulting $30,000 that are based on the demo, but we're still working with the owner to put them, in this case, put them on a payment plan and collect those tax dollars, recoup those tax dollars so that the city's made whole again.
Real quick, Brennan, can you say how many we have in the pipeline? Is it in batches of 5? Are we talking dozens or 100, or how many properties are sort of on your radar?
Right. The question relates to how many, what I'll term problem properties are on the city's radar. About 250 to 300 different properties all across the city. These are properties that have been substandard, uninhabitable. You can't live there. There are no utilities. They're vacant. They're abandoned. And roughly 250 to 300 properties. And to the mayor's point, we're taking little bites of this elephant, but we're pushing through about 5 to 6 on a consistent basis to get them in a position to either have a property owner step up when they realize that the city is really going to tear their property down if they don't do the right thing, or in cases like this, if we don't have somebody that can or wants to demolish the structure, the city will step in and do that.
I know the goal is not to demolish these, to get them rehab, people living in them again. Do we foresee accelerating the number of properties? We're going to do it in batches to try to address the elephant, so to speak?
And the question is, do we see acceleration on the enforcement efforts? And yes, we do. The mayor's been very clear that a problem like this not only affects the immediate neighborhood, but affects the entire community, whether it's crime, it's drug needles, it's trespassing, those sorts of things. We're all a part of that in the planning department. We're a part of that, and so we want to do our part.
Thanks, Brennan. Brennan, one more for you. From Peter Rice from Downtown Albuquerque News. Can you talk about how the ADAPT program fits into this effort and this process? What kind of offenses you're tracking with ADAPT? How the point system works? Or if not ready yet, when will we start to release those details?
Sure. Question about the ADAPT program, which is the abandoned, dilapidated properties team that they've put together, and how code enforcement works with them, and kind of the analysis, the data-driven analysis that we use to identify these properties. The ADAPT program is a sister program to code enforcement. We work hand in hand with those folks. ADAPT primarily addresses multi-unit residential properties. So the Rising Phoenix apartment complex that was mentioned earlier, that's an ADAPT property. That program is working on that. And they are focused primarily on litigation because the owner won't or can't do what code enforcement has asked them to do to correct the situation. The point system that's come up, or that we've come up with, is essentially a combination of calls for service from the fire department, the police department, code enforcement, and other related city agencies, combined with things like the nature of the violation or the problem. So, for example, if there's a problem property where there are multiple overdoses and assaults and maybe a homicide in combination with some code violations, that's going to increase the level or the priority of that particular property as it relates to the city's enforcement actions. And again, it's a multi-agency, multi-city agency process, but we work very closely with the ADAPT program to work on those sites. All right, thank you.
From Nancy at KOAT and from Jessica at the Journal, what's your reaction to the shootings that happened overnight?
Question is about some of the shootings that happened last night, and I would just begin first by saying, anytime there's a loss of life in our city, it's a terrible thing, and it's something that no matter what happened, the families that are involved, this is an extremely difficult and tragic time for them. Now, these situations, I can share, a little bit in terms of what I know for details. Of course, I check with APD, and as usual, there's a use of force protocol that our city goes through, and that's been in place for a couple of years since our administration came in, and so we'll release information accordingly, as we always do with these issues. But a couple of things that we do know, one of these situations, there were, we believe, that shots were fired. We're grateful that none of our officers were injured. and that was an extremely dangerous situation. The other one is one of the most difficult situations our officers ever respond to, and that's when there is a family or neighbor escalation situation with a child involved and firearms present. That was the case at the other one. And so at this point, we know that these are extremely difficult situations for our officers. And so we appreciate that, everything we believe was done to try and just minimize any violence or danger to anyone. But as usual, all the details of that will be combed through in the camera, video, and so forth. And so it's premature to say anything beyond that, especially from my perspective. So take other detailed questions to APD, and then we'll be in touch, of course. The multi-agency task force is reviewing those, as always is the case.
Just for clarity, was the one with the child involved, was that the one at Taylor Ranch, or was that the one later in the night?
Yeah, the Taylor Ranch situation, or let's say the West Side one, was a neighbor dispute with a firearm involved, at least one, and a child involved. And the other one was a situation, as you saw probably, where there was actually an individual fleeing and shooting at officers, in which case the following incident sort of occurred. Thanks.